unable.
Great. Just started.
Sure. Why don't you introduce yourself and then we can go around so you know who everyone is. These are the board members and board representatives for the PQ controlling entity.
Great. Awesome. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Julian Belilti. I am the CEO at Honeydew Energy Advisors. We've been working with Jimmy on benchmarking, making sure everything is accurate according to the newer requirements from the Department of Energy and Environment. We also offer a lot of other services from energy procurement, solar consulting, BEPS compliance consulting, which we're going to get to later, and pretty much any other energy and water saving services as well. Yeah, and I guess we can go around and meet everybody.
Sure. So you know me, I'm the PQCE manager. And Mark Line is the board president of PQCE.
Great.
Emika is the treasurer for PQCE controlling entity. Brianna Jones is the representative for retail. And Derek is the manager.
Secretary.
Barton.
I'm the only one without a
And Thomas Lee is the Lafayette representative.
And I'm with Woolly Mammoth Theater Company.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Well, nice to meet everybody. Should we still wait or should I continue?
No, go ahead. We can go ahead and start.
Okay, great. So I'll get started with benchmarking and kind of backing up a little bit to explain on really how the requirements started, what the reason was for that. So back in 2014, all buildings above 50,000 square feet were required to submit their benchmarking reports every year by April 1st. The benchmarking report includes all of your building characteristics, so square footage, the different space types in the building, number of units, bedrooms, percentage of the building that's heated and cooled, so on and so forth. And then you also upload the energy usage, so that's electric and gas, and water usage from the previous year. That will essentially provide you with a score, an Energy Star score, or you can look at it as like an efficiency score. It's 1 through 100, 1 being the least efficient, 100 being the most efficient. And really how they come up with that score is they're comparing your building to other similar buildings, so of the same space type, so residential, multifamily, and of the same size all across the nation. There are many cities and states that do require this as well. So there are several buildings on there, and the more buildings that are added, that can obviously change your score too, because it's pretty much a percentage of where you fall along those buildings with the same space type and size. Now going on to 2021, in the last, I would say, year or so, DOEE has been a lot more strict on the accuracy of the benchmarking reports. The reason is the benchmarking now moves on to what they call Building Energy Performance Standards, which is this new program in DC that requires any inefficient buildings that fall below the DC median Energy Star score, requiring them to improve their efficiency. So either going above the score or within the first 5-year cycle, at least reduce your electric and gas usage aggregate by 20%. You have 5 years to comply. This building does, in fact, and I'm going to share my screen right now. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Portfolio manager. Great. Perfect. So I'm going to go to the summary real quick. So the score that they're going to use to determine whether or not you're subject to BEPS is your 2019 score. Your 2019 score is a 5, which is fairly low. And your 2020 score increased to a 13, probably because the retail spaces in the building had to close for a certain amount of time due to the pandemic. We're seeing this pattern along with other buildings that also have retail spaces below. Now, something we wanted to discuss and something that Jimmy and I have been working on for probably over a month now is figuring out if we can exempt the retail spaces from your report so that it really just captures the multifamily usage of the building and not the commercial side, right? The retail spaces. So there are certain factors that you have to qualify for in order to exempt certain space types from the building. The aggregate of the square footage of all the retail spaces has to be less than 10% of the entire building. They cannot receive an Energy Star score on their own, which retail spaces cannot. And really the most important one is making sure that they're either separately metered or at least sub-metered. From our discussion with Jimmy, it sounds like at least the cooling towers are not sub-metered or separately metered. The specific cooling towers for the retail spaces, I believe that's tower 3 and 4. Also something that came up was the trash compactors as well that are, I guess, exclusively used for the retail spaces. So that's something else that you would like to sub-meter. Now, the first thing I want to ask from the group is, because you do have a few different options. One, you can go as is and keep the retail spaces in there, move forward with an energy audit so that you can have a report of all the improvements you can make and how that will impact your score. Or we could look into adding sub-meters to the cooling tower and the trash compactor. But I would have to confirm before you guys spend any money on this with DOEE how that would look. So if you were to install, let's say, sub-meters by December 30th, right? For example, we're just throwing out dates here. And they are running, right? So by January 1st to December 31st the following year, you'll have a year of data that we can separate, the retail data that we can separate from your benchmarking report and just remove it completely. I have to confirm with DOEE to see if that updated score from the sub-metering can count towards BEPS compliance, right? Because if you remove their usage, obviously your score is going to increase, which is a good thing. If it increases past 66, or if it shows a 20% reduction in your energy usage, will they consider that as fully compliant for the first cycle? So if the board, the master association, agrees to proceeding with sub-metering, then the ball will be on my court to confirm with DOEE that we can use that as a way to comply. If not, then they'll most likely use that new score for the next cycle, and they'll ask you to make improvements to the building now, go through an energy audit, find out which ones are going to make the biggest impact, which ones are the most hanging fruit, so on and so forth, in order to comply through energy conservation measures or efficiency projects.
Can I ask a question about the sub-metering?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, awesome. So we're talking about the cooling towers, number 4 and number 5. And my understanding to date, based on the reports we get from ECC, who does our sub-metering, is that there already is a sub-meter on cooling tower 4 and 5, but Jimmy, maybe you could weigh in on.
Yeah,
also
so
part of
we,
this area?
so we have water submetering, but we do not have electricity submetering. And electricity is where the focus is. Water plays a role in the sense that you use energy to circulate the water, you use energy to warm the water. So the focus is on actual electricity, which we do not have electricity submetering.
Okay.
And
Looked
sorry, go ahead.
So, but, okay, can I just jump in and just do a little overview on that? So I was thinking that, well, first of all, I don't think that we can get submetering in by December 30th. I just don't think that's gonna probably be feasible. But if we did do it, it would be a situation where we would submeter, like, all the cooling towers and all the components associated with those cooling towers. And then from the, we would gather that data from the submeters, and then it would be the rest of the amount that I charge per percentage based on the documents would then, fall in place. But obviously, this is, we're just kind of skimming the surface right now on how this would possibly play out.
I'm gonna have to run for another call in just a few minutes, but does submetering work on the cooling towers since they don't exclusively service the retail space? They also service the theater?
So the theater is going to be considered retail. So it would be Tower 4 and Tower 5. So yeah, the theater falls under the retail category.
But then we'd still have to break it down between our usage and their usage. Is that possible?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, because what you would do is submeter each cooling tower. Because we would have to have all that data to properly, bill when the master bill comes in. And I was just, I was discussing this with Julian. I worked up the street over at Gallery Place, and they started submetering at many electrical points about 4 or 5 years ago, because they realized, they were getting a master bill and they weren't able to charge, the retail units for that usage, and also some of the usage that the condo building was using. So they implemented that about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's not, and basically from what I recall, they kind of did this thing where, the company came in, set up the meters, and then charged like a leasing fee for the meter itself. And then of course there's a fee for reading, and it becomes all digital, sort of transmitted, similar to how ECC reads the water meters.
And I can't remember how we came out on the garage being able to be excluded or not, but would we need to submeter the garage as well? Or do they have separate meters?
So, yeah, I mean, we don't have any submetering of any kind on the garage for electricity. And, I'd have to defer to Julian on that, because Julian, we're not really allowed to exempt the garage, or can we consider that retail? Because I think initially they were saying we couldn't.
I'm gonna have to check. I think there's a rule on the size of the garage compared to the building itself. If it's less than 10%, then I think we can exclude it. If it's more than 10%, I don't think we can. So I'm gonna have to double check with DOE.
Yeah, when I was reading the FAQ, it seemed like we could, but it wasn't clear, and they seem to have done a good job of not being clear about a lot of things. So yeah, so we can.
Yeah, and one of the things that Julie and I were discussing was the fact that in the past years, it's constantly evolved. Like I would explain to them exactly how this building was set up, and they would tell me how to, what information they needed to benchmark, and then that was constantly changing. And now we're at this point where, they're treating the building as a whole, and we don't have the data to exempt retail.
So originally it was actually just common area spaces when it first started. Then it jumped to individual units, so aggregated usage. And then it jumped to including all the retail spaces. So from what I understand, I think they were just slowly getting people comfortable with benchmarking in general. Because if they just jump straight to, you have to include all the units, all the retail spaces, every space in the building, it would have been very complicated to get everybody to jump on board. So they started out very easy, and then over the years, they just added more and more details to it. And I would like to add something else. As we're talking about this, let's say that we do decide to go with the sub-metering. If you did it, let's say sometime next year, right, which is still early, right? It's a lot of decisions you guys have to make. But if we did it sometime next year, that means we really won't have the data until the year after. Which that means we're using the data from the year after, and we're benchmarking that the year after that, right? So let's count that next year it's 2022. If you install it then, we'll have a full year's data in 2023, which we're benchmarking in 2024. That means by 2024, around April, you'll know whether or not this has helped your score, whether or not this has helped you comply. If it didn't, right, and you're still not in compliance for any reason, maybe the usage has increased significantly in the building for some reason, you're going to have a lot less time to implement a project. So you at that time, you're going to have to pretty much rush if you're still not in compliance. The deadline is essentially 2026. So all of the data in 2026 needs to represent your score that is in compliance. So really the last year you have to implement and finalize projects is 2025, just so you know. I know I was just jumping back and forth everywhere. I was
So
kind
when-
of calculation in my head.
So when they're doing the energy audit, are they gonna be able to shed some light on that? I mean.
Oh, yeah.
They'll be able to shed, right, because that's if we, so the big decision obviously is, does the board want to move ahead with an energy audit, or does the board want to just jump into the sub-metering and try to move forward with?
Or an alternative.
Once obviously you talk to them and figure out whether.
Yeah, I mean, what prevents us from doing both?
Nothing.
We can do both, yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do
Yeah.
both.
I mean,
Yeah, I think what I was thinking is like, if you do you would do the energy audit as the first step, and with that energy information, we could, definitely implement a metering system, because I think that, it would definitely be a lot clearer, like who's using what.
yeah, I don't think as an operational thing, it hurts us to know where things are being used. That seems something simple. And I mean, I would even want to go so far as maybe just stick one on AC1 and AC2 so we can keep track of those as well. But, getting that going is separate and apart from doing the audit piece, which we need to understand what needs to happen in order to improve our score, because the way they've set this up is we're continually fighting against not just ourselves, but every other building too. So this is a losing battle no matter what we do. So.
Well, what we think is they're most likely going to keep the median score, which is a 66. That's the score that you need to meet, or if you fall below, you're subject to BEPS. They're going to keep that for the next cycle, 5 years from now. by that time, if you had sub-metered, your base score at that time will be a lot more accurate when it comes to just the multifamily building, right? So for the following years, I think you're going to be in a better position. It's just this year that in 2019, you didn't have those sub-meters. So we cannot use just the multifamily portion of the building as the baseline. That makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, what I can do next is I'll reach out to DOE.
So, Julie, I'm sorry, just one question. I know what the target is, but I thought there were also options where you could have a plan where you may not reach your target, but then you won't get penalized because you're making steps to improving.
Yeah, so that's the prescriptive pathway. That will require a lot more projects to be implemented in the building. You don't have to show that you are actually saving the energy that you plan to save, right? But it does require a lot more work than the other ones. So for example, in the beginning, you have to, after the audit and you present the report to DOE, you have to agree with them on what projects that you're going to implement. Then you have to show them the contractors you're going to work with. Then you have to measure and verify your savings, even if it's not where your goal was, at least to show that you've implemented it. So it's a lot of back and forth with DOE, where right now I'm looking at your score, comparing 2019 to 2020. As of now, you reduced your electric and gas combined usage by 21%. So technically right now, you are considered in compliance, right? But you have to make sure that this sustains all the way through the end of the cycle, right? Which is 2026. In 2020, those retail spaces closed, right? At least temporarily. And they had a lot less people. As we continue on towards 2026, I believe Carmine's is reopening or is going to open. That's going to be a huge user. And then you're also going to have a lot more people going to these retail spaces, a lot more energy being used. Now, if DOE accepts that that we can sub-meter and then use that new score to compare to the current baseline of 5, you're most likely going to already have complied. So I don't think it's worth to go down the prescriptive pathway to do a lot more work, most likely spend a lot more money when you can comply by sub-metering and then maybe just implementing one of the energy conservation methods, whatever you prefer.
And I'm sorry I missed the first 10 minutes. I couldn't get over fast enough, but how I mean, sub-metering is not going to reduce our usage, but you would think it'll clean up our reporting, and that the cleaned up reporting will end up increasing our score. Is that what the plan is here?
So sub-metering will actually decrease your usage, because what I would do if the DOE accepts it, I would take all the usage for the retail spaces, electricity, gas, and water, and deduct that from your report, right? So all the data that you have in here includes retail. I'm going to remove the retail spaces once we get sub-metering data. That means your energy usage is going to decrease on here.
Is that because the retail spaces should be filing their own numbers?
No, I mean, you guys technically qualify except for one section to completely remove them, and they won't even have to benchmark on their own because retail spaces cannot receive an Energy Star score. So you would just exempt them completely. They would be exempt, not have to do it on their own.
I didn't realize our retail spaces were exempt altogether. So
Yeah.
And also doesn't the square footage get removed, and square footage plays a critical role in all this?
Exactly. So instead of looking at your building right now, I'm going to show the details. You see all of the different spaces in here?
Yes,
So from, and this is where I don't think we'll be able to remove the garage, but we can remove everything underneath the garage. All these spaces right here.
well, the garage ought to be helping us because the amount of energy the garage uses per square foot is dang low,
Exactly.
you know?
And it,
Yeah,
you know,
and we have,
LED
Yeah, I-
lights.
account as
I agree
well.
with that because we have these, we've got the LED lights in there, that we actually. So the crazy thing is that if we didn't have LED lights in there and then we, installed LED lights, we would then be in compliance.
Yeah, pretty much.
But now we're already past that.
Exactly. I see
Okay.
someone rose their hand.
So, oh, looks like Thomas Lee did. Thomas, go ahead, and then I have a question as well.
Yeah, hi, this is Thomas. I'm in a taxi, anyway, question: Are we? And I also missed the first 10 minutes because I'm at Home Depot as well. But are we going to be required to report residential?
Like in unit? If so, yes, we are required to report each unit's electricity, water, and gas
Sorry
usage.
about that. I'm having a problem with Did you hear my question?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, Thomas, he answered yes, and we did submit those aggregate numbers. And all the meters for individual units are set up to automatically, on a yearly basis, send all that data to DCDOE.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course.
Julian, I have a question about the retail.
Mhm.
Typically, we are exempt on the basis of being less than 50,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about breaking out and then also having the theater break out, does the retail I manage and the theater suddenly become one entity and possibly, count as over 50,000 square feet, or do we continue to be two separate entities?
So that's a very good question. I'm gonna actually ask DOE this question because we haven't benchmarked individual retail spaces. Most of them are exempt, period. I think maybe a theater may have to benchmark, but I'm not sure if they're able to get a score. So because the theater, from the data that we received, is 28,000 square feet, it's above 25,000 square feet. It could be required to benchmark starting next year. So starting next year, all buildings above 25,000 square feet are required to benchmark. So I'll check on that. Carmine's, which according to here, looks like it's about 19,000 square feet. That,
It's not to have every individual retailer specifically considered, or at least that's not my question. I've always addressed the property as all property owned by the same ownership.
okay.
So in other words, Carmine's, Rosica, Freethink, Soul Spice, Starbucks, which is now Gregory's, Luke's Lobster, Sweet Green, all of those are one.
So they are all owned by the same entity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
But it is an entity that is less than 50,000 square feet. But if we were to add in Woolley, we would, the
Be
two
over that.
would exceed, as you can see, 50,000 square feet. So I wanted to know if, how that would work out, if we would be considered on our own or not.
Yeah, let me check with DOE. I'm gonna have to ask them a lot of questions to make sure of all that. There might be a chance they may have to benchmark altogether. I do know that we have done this for another building, also managed by EJF. It's 601 Penn. Half the building on the left side is all multifamily. On the right side, it's all offices, and on the bottom, it's all retail. We were able to separate those into two entities. So the commercial entity with the office and retail, and then the residential with the multifamily. But we were able to do that because there was no common spaces where you can access the multifamily and the commercial side, right? They both had separate entrances. And that was one question they kept asking to confirm, right, in order to do that. So
We
I'll
would
talk to them.
similarly qualify because we have separate entrances.
So you do have separate entrances as well. So there's no.
No
shared
one
entrance.
from none of my tenants can get into the residential easily without the permission of somebody in residential.
Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, I mean, we can also explain to them that there's, I mean, they're not going to go on site. So we can explain to them that there's no shared access.
The only shared access, I mean, some of the retail does have access to common hallways that feed into the loading dock, because loading
Like
dock.
a back door or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Loading dock is shared.
Okay. So with that, I think I'm just gonna have to ask DOE all these questions to see what we can specifically do with this, how we're gonna separate it. Will the private entity of all the retail spaces have to benchmark separately? And then I can get back to you all regarding that. Another thing to keep in mind, 2024, I believe, is when buildings are going to be required to hire a certified engineer. It cannot be the same company that benchmarks your building, to verify all of this data and make sure that your benchmarking is accurate. So they'll go to the building, they'll actually take measurements, they'll actually count the units, the number of bedrooms, all that type of stuff to make sure everything is accurate. So I know that will help at that time, but obviously we want to be handling this and making sure it's as accurate as possible before. So I think the next step before you make any decisions is for me to go to DOE and figure out exactly how to do this. And whether or not the retail spaces will have to benchmark as a whole, if they're exempt and separated from this benchmarking report. And then once I have those answers, we can always reconvene over the next few weeks, because they're pretty quick at responding. And yeah, and then we take it from there.
Okay, one quick question, just so we have all the, I don't know, questions going into it.
Yeah.
You mentioned sub-metering a compactor. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, it was just a discussion that Julian and I had. One of the past board members who works for the National Gallery of Art had mentioned that that trash compactors are huge electricity hogs. And that would be something that, since it's exclusively used by retail, that we could potentially sub-meter and deduct if we were able to exempt retail.
So I have a question about that, because on the bill, the trash is broken down not only amongst retail, but also other entities.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't it used by Stellati as well?
Yeah, yes, yeah, and then I don't know whether it's doable. It was just something that we kind of threw out there that we were gonna look into.
Okay, and so sub-metering would just be the electricity.
That's right,
Got it.
the electricity portion of it.
Great. Are there any more questions? All right. So again, ball's on my court. I'm going to reach out to DOE right after this call, get to the bottom of this. I think it may even help. I'm going to see if she's available, because DOE is really relying on Honeydew Energy Advisors when it comes to benchmarking for condos and co-ops, and specifically benchmarking for these buildings that are split between associations and retail spaces. So they may even want to jump on a call with you guys if we set up another one so that they can get the hang of this, and then they make sure that they're replicating this to any other buildings that we're not working on ourselves. Because you guys are not the first ones to be asking these questions. We have a handful of these buildings that are just like yours. You actually have the best score out of all of them. They all have ones right now. So they're a little bit more concerned than you guys are. So you're not the only ones, just so you know. And if you guys are okay with it, I could ask DOE to join the call just in case more questions come up and we don't have to go back and forth and keep waiting for answers.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Hey, Thomas, your mic is on. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, one of the things I wanted to mention to everyone is that, when I reached out to DCDOE about this whole situation, they were like, well, you're working with Honeydew, you'll have to work with them to figure this out. So you can see that DCDOE is trying to figure out how to best, calculate and work with these mixed use buildings like ours.
Yep. No. And they're not looking to penalize anybody. Their goal is just to make the city more efficient and run fully on renewables. So they're here to help us, and I'll essentially be your bridge to DOEE. So Jimmy doesn't have to get different answers each time from DOE like he did in the past, and just cause even more confusion. We'll make sure to simplify everything for you guys, get all the answers, and make sure we set up a path moving forward. Great.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Of course. And I will send the recording as soon as it's uploads on my computer.
All right, sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Julian.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.